another American TESOL Presents Free Friday webinars. My name is Shelly Sanchez Terrell, and I am here thanks to AmericanTESOL.com. We are here every Friday to bring you another topic to help with your language learners and also help you integrate technology in the classroom. This week, we're going to talk about teaching with comics, and you can find the slides and bookmarks at shellyterrell.com/comics, or you can go to youtube.com/user/atesol and find recordings of our webinars. Comics are a great way for students of all ages to learn. It's a great way for language learners to really grasp English. It provides a setting. When you read a comic book, you often will see the dialogue and the plot divided into different frames. The great thing is that each frame is part of the story. And it's easy to be able to see what the characters are talking about. You can see a context, you can see a setting, you can see expression on the characters' faces, and it all helps to illustrate the language and the events that are occurring. So comics are really a great way for students to become more literate. The other great thing about comic books is that language learners are also able to understand difficult text. So, for example, if you just happen to um, pick up a graphic novel, for example, and it's about Shakespeare, it's a lot easier to understand Shakespeare. And there is definitely a lot of graphics and comics that do happen to have the plot of Shakespeare on there, and it's much easier to understand that language, even though it's archaic, and to understand the events that are occurring because you can see the characters, um, what they're dressed like. You can see them in their acting, so it's really a great way to learn. And so you can learn with comic books. You can learn in comic strips. You can, if you're a child, you're a very young language learner, you can learn with comics that are with the lower level of vocabulary in English. And if you're an adult, you can also learn with comics. So that's one of the great things about comics, is that you can use comics to teach very, very young learners all the way to much older learners. Comics can also be great learning materials, as well as you can have students create comics themselves. So if you're using comics as learning materials, it's great to know where you can go to find these different materials and where you can get free ones, right? So one way you can do that, and one of the main ways that I have found, is if you visit ComiXenglish.com. So Comics English is a site that I recently discovered that has different types of comic strips. I think they have 4 or 5 different comic strips. And what they have done is they have put little quizzes so that way language learners can understand what's happening within the comic strip. They have vocabulary. Some actually focus on different types of grammar structures, homonyms, things like that. So ComiXenglish.com. And thank you, Peggy, for sharing that in the chat box. Comics English also has different lesson plans. It has advice. If you click on the tab that says Learners, then you'll be able to find tips on how to learn with comics if you're like a self-learner and you do self-study. And then you also find lesson plans and resources for teachers, so that way you can teach more effectively with comics in general. Here's an example of one of the vocabulary lessons that are there. on ComiXenglish.com. This one in particular actually focuses on the English language. So you learn about there versus there versus there. And they do that with a comic. Okay, so not all of these do focus on English language itself, but some of these comic strips actually do within ComiXenglish.com. So I think that's really interesting. And you can see down here that there's a very simple quiz that goes with it. This one is questioning on grammar and spelling. So here, the first one says, mark all that apply, and there are questions that go along with this comic strip. So a lot of the topics do have to do with English language, and also the usage and things like that. But a lot of them, the comics actually on the site are very general. They aren't made specifically for language learning. It's just that the comic itself happens to be as can be used for both. There are some sites though where the comic itself is made to teach. And so I want to show you some of those materials so you can use that with your students. And one of the ones that is best for language learners is grammarmancomic.com. Now, if you go to Grammarman Comics, then you're able to not only see the comic strip in color, and that's different than the one previously, the site previously. And yes, okay, so Peggy and George asked, can you take the quiz right on the site? And yes, you can. That is correct, on ComiXenglish.com. So Grammarman Comic doesn't have quizzes or anything on the actual site, but it does have the material, so it's great for teaching material. So you can find not only the comic strip, but you can find this in video form. So Grammarman, who's Brian Boy, he's actually a teacher in Thailand of language learners. He has different videos that he's made of Grammarman, and in all of these different types of really short videos and strips teach you something. They teach you something like, for example, here, this one talks about the article ants, and this one actually talks about, a and an and the. Here they have semicolon. Yeah. So there's that play on words. Brian actually has, well, Grammarman on the Grammarman site. There's also examples of different students around the world creating different comics themselves or coloring different Grammarman incidents. So that's interesting as well too. Grammarman also will do comics that have to do with certain topics as well. One of the most recent ones was with Donald Trump. So there's more Grammarman comics that come out, and they're not always specifically about grammar, but they can also be about popular topics happening as well. The other comic that's really good for language learners, especially older learners, so Grammarman comics can be used for adolescents too and adults, to teach grammar. But one that's specifically more for teenagers or more advanced language learners are the comics from Larry Perros. So Larry Perros is a comic, and his comics have to do with word origins, history, idioms. They're illustrated, and so you can see here. He has a whole bunch on the Huffington Post, so it is a smart level of reading that's there. One of my favorite resources of Larry Perros comics is also is his Pinterest account. His Pinterest account actually showcases all the different types of comics that he features, and he has a Pinterest board that is specifically for English language learners. There's others, and you can use that material as well, not just that board, but he has tons of comics pinned in other categories as well. It's very visual, and it's a great way to really showcase the comics he has out there. The other place where you can find comics for language learners, and this is just one strip. These are actually, is wronghands1.com. So Wrong Hands has a Twitter account, a great place, a great Twitter to follow. But if you go to the site, you're just gonna find one comic strip, like almost like a political cartoon or something. But it's not like different frames like the other ones that have so much, that are so rich with material. But it does show um, a lot of great features, especially if the English language. So here, for example, there's anatomy of even more songs. In here, you see heavy metal, classical, electronic dance, grunge, and then it's color coded, the language, so it shows you how it goes through. And it makes a great discussion for that. But that's part of this particular comic strip. Here's another example. This one talks about alliteration. It talks about film synopsis, and it's visual and it illustrates. But once again, it's only one frame. It only illustrates one concept, and it does do it not only for English language learners, but English literature, the language arts. Um, it's very good about that. Oh, and also at this, you can see also music. Music would be something that if you teach music, then this is a great comic for that too. For young learners, you can find some great reading material at GoComics.com. They have tons and tons of different comics that you can read online and just take a look at. But if you go to Kid Town, and this one's specifically geared for young learners, for children. And on this one, you can teach. It's illustrated a different science concept or fact. So gocomics.com/kidtown, and you'll find a lot of comics that teach science as well, and about animals and difficult concepts like science theories and physics and things like that. The other one that also teaches science, technology, engineering, math is instructablescom. Now, with this particular comic, it's a really great reading material. And one of the reasons why it's great, the material, is because with Instructables, students are able to follow that comic. It's an instructional comic. It actually gives them instructions to build or make something. So here, students are able to make an underwater viewer. Here, bottle rockets, and here, a hovercraft. Now, the great thing about this is that not only are they reading the comic, but the assessment whether or not they understand the instructions, and it's very specific types of language. It's learning instructions, following instructions, learning commands, all of that. At the end, you can tell whether they actually understand, because whether or not they build something correctly. And if they didn't, then they can go back, look at a step, and try to and ask questions about the language there, or try to see where they went wrong, and go back and try to build whatever it is that they are building. So you can find that in Instructables. The other site for much where you can find different comics that talk about history, famous people, things like that, is zenpencils.com, and that's actually one of the sites I've used as readings this past year with my college students that were intermediate language level of English, and they really did enjoy they enjoyed the Zen Pencils series. The one that I used with, I think, was the one with Sigourney Weaver had written about, or the it was one of the scientists, and so we read one about taking care of the planet, and we went through all of the stages. But you find a lot of really great reading materials at zenpencils.com for a little bit older learners. This one could be used here. This one was one of my favorites. This one was of Frida Kahlo, If She Was a Kid. And so I did enjoy that one as well. You can find a lot more free comics online, and also that you can purchase and things like that on ComiXology.com. They have a bunch of free comics that you can download online and use as study materials. There's also the Marvel Comics app. So if you actually want to teach with famous comics like Spider-Man and things like that, sometimes you can find some free issues online that students can access on their mobile devices. And other times you'll find them and they're only like 99 cents. So if you are trying to do a longer reading material, that's something that you definitely can check out as well. And it's not as expensive as if students were to purchase a whole book. It's only like 99 cents or something. So but there are free ones listed as well in Marvel's um, the Marvel app. Kidscomics.com, that's specifically for young learners, so you can buy comics for them as well. So now you see comics as great materials for learning the English language, for able to see the structures, for able to understand the plot, to learn science and math. So those were all examples there. And now you can find also one of the great ways for students to learn is by making a comic or creating a comic. And there are lots of free web tools and apps to be able to get your learners to create comics no matter what device you have. So if you're fortunate enough to have mobile devices, and that's what I find when I've traveled to a lot of different countries. So I've been to countries all over the world, and over 20 countries in person. And so we usually use the mobile devices. And one way that we use the mobile device is to create comics. The apps are the best ways to create comics if you're able to. So my favorite one is ComicsHead. So ComicsHead is an iOS and an Android app. It's really, really fantastic because students are able to choose from a library of characters. They just easily create a new frame. They can add their own images. They can draw within this app, which is really, really cool. I love that. Or they can just choose characters and backgrounds and scenery from ComicsHead. So that's really great. Now, this is all in the free version. If you do get the paid version and you're on a tablet like the iPad, then one of the greatest things about this particular comic creator that the others don't have is that you can add voice to the different characters. So if you have 2 or 3 or 4, let's say this was the one you created here and you see there's 2 funny creatures here. Well, you can actually give them a voice if you had the paid version. So you could, and I think that's awesome because not only are students practicing their reading and writing skills, but they're also practicing their listening and speaking skills with this app as well. So comicshead.com is really, really fantastic for language learners. The other one that I like, oh, here's an example of ComicsHead where one of my students actually added pictures they found on the internet and then their own pictures as well. You can see where the student added speech bubbles that were all part of ComicsHead. And then here's another example of ComicsHead. This is one where it's just different characters and things like that, where they have different characters and backgrounds that were not part that the student picked from the gallery or library of ComicsHead and didn't provide themselves. So you could do both ways, and you can make very different looking comics, as you can see. See. The other one that's very popular, and if you happen to be in Canada, then you'll love this, is Picston, because Picston has a premium account that's available for free for all teachers so that are in Canada. So if you happen to be part of Canada and yes, exactly, you get the premium, but you can still get the basic free Picston, which is available to everybody. So unfortunately, when you do sign up for Picston.com, and if you're not from Canada, then you want to click the one that says fun. Do not click the one that says schools, because it'll just give you the runaround. But the fun one is actually free and will let you enter right away. The great thing about Picston is available also on the web. So ComicsHead, Friendstrip, which are both apps that I love, are not available on the web. They're only apps. But Picston is available on the web. So if you have computers that your students share or labs, or they have computers at home or in the library, then this is a great place for them to go. They do have to register, and then they create those comics. Now, there's different characters. The characters look real. They have backgrounds. They have different types of speech bubbles. So there's a lot your students can work with. This is an example. You've probably seen this before lots of times because this is one of the ones that I'm really, really proud of from one of my students, which is where my students illustrated Pride and Prejudice through Picston Comics. So you can see that she chose the different characters, the background setting, different props. You can see like different formats for the action to describe what's happening. And then over here is the dialogue. So there's quite a bit of things that my student was able to do with using Picston. So here are a few ideas on what to do when your students do create comics. What kind of lessons do you have? Well, one is where they can take an article, they can take an excerpt of a book, and they can illustrate it in comic form, like you saw with Pride and Prejudice. Another idea is for them to create dialogue. So in that part of your textbook where it shows role plays, which is part of a lot of different textbooks, then you can have them, instead of doing an actual role play, they can actually illustrate that dialogue in comic form. They can create the characters, they can put a context for that language, which is really important. So in a role play, we can imagine having a conversation outside, but in a comic, we could actually write down that conversation, dress up the characters, show their emotion, and then provide that setting. So comics work really well when you are doing dialogues or role play, or that section in the book where it has the conversation. Makebelievecomics.com is another great way for your students to create comics. That's actually the one that my students use within the last semester, the fall one. And the reason they used Makebelieve Comics is because Makebelieve Comics you don't have to register for. So on the web, you can actually just go to makebelievecomics.com/the maker. You click on how many frames you want. Then you click on the characters. You got to keep clicking on here until it gets the character you want, and then you have options. And then here, you just keep on clicking, and then when you're finished, you can save it as a JPEG file. The great thing about Makebelieve Comics is it supports like over 50 different languages, so you can, if you teach languages like French or Spanish or anything, then you'll really, really like Makebelieve Comics. Which was actually made for learners. So it's a safe site to be able to also create comics and look at comics. Make Believe Comics also has different printables. So it has lesson plans and stuff like that, over 350 of them for teachers. Here's an example. Here's a writing prompt where students are able to see a comic form. This is like a graphic organizer as well, and able to hear Bill Zimmerman, who is actually the creator of Makebelieve Comics, has where he created this, where it's the comic in the background, and then the student does this writing, which is imagine a conversation between Christopher Columbus and Native Americans. So there are tons, over 300 different types of lessons and activities using Makebelieve Comics, which I think is really awesome. You can have students create digital stories. And I use Friendstrip. Friendstrip was actually the easiest way to create a comic with a mobile device, with a cell phone. My students love this the most, using the Friendstrip comic app on their mobile devices. It's for iOS and Android, and one of the reasons why they liked it was because there's also plot starters. So, for example, your students want to create a pilot stories, then they start it out for you, and it does do that with different types of plots, and so that's what makes this a really great feature especially with language learners who sometimes might struggle with being creative or trying to think of, what kind of story they're going to make or what characters should they choose, then that kind of gives them a jump start on that. My students also thought it was the easiest way to create a comic was through Friendship. They could create a comic within minutes, so that was really nice. Another thing that students can do is they can explore a character or highlight grammar structures. And here, one of my students actually highlighted the past tense. So all the verbs were highlighted, and they were different colors. So you can do that with yours, where they put all the vocabulary in one color, green maybe. They can highlight the past tense or verbs or conjunctions, any way you want to do it. So this one is by my student, and this was created with Marvel.com. So if you want to use famous superheroes and comic characters that are in a lot of famous comics, then you can use Marvel for that as well. Bless you. That was Savannah sneezing in the background there. Phrase it. Phrase it's not necessarily like a comic creator. It's not like you make several frames and make a really great comic. But if you just want to do like one picture that looks like a comic, that's with a speech bubble basically, which can be really easy and simple for kids, especially, or those that are beginners with English, then you can try Phrase It. Phrase It has where you can add your own images and then add speech bubbles to them. So an idea there is to get an animal, take a picture of an animal, and then imagine what that animal would say. Give human characteristics to it. You can have a mind and a thought process, or tell a joke or something. Another idea is to illustrate the language within a math word problem. So here, this is illustrated for you at thinks.wordpress.com. Now on Thinks, there's a lot of comics that illustrate math concepts and stuff. And this particular author did it with bid strips. Now bid strips no longer exist. Not for schools and to really make it. Now the characters do. You can still make those bit strip characters, but you can no longer use bit strips to actually make comic strips. There's book creators. So if you want to make a whole graphic novel or comic book, or have your students do that to illustrate, a plot, or to be able to create something much longer with comics, you can use Book Creator. It's a free app for iOS, Androids, and Windows. And now they have like different frames, speech bubbles, to make it to where your students can create like graphic novel or comic strip. You can use any of the materials, of course, that your students do to introduce a lesson. So also, if you, for example, if I wanted to, let's say that we were going to read Pride and Prejudice, that was the novel we were going to read this semester, then I could take that comic strip from my student, and I can always show that at the beginning to get my students interested and to kind of get an overview of the plot. That's a great way to introduce a lesson. Like I said, you can find a lot of classics. You can find a comic strip for, especially like Shakespeare. That's a good way to get students interested, instead of just giving them the novel and it's a bunch of text and then they might get confused. So that's one way to make it more engaging. You can use it to create political cartoons as well. There's a lot of things happening in history and politics right now all around the world. There are, new government policies. There's new history going on. Brexit. There's recently with Istanbul. Turkey. They came up with new, campaign and things to happen there to give the president, the leadership, more power. There's things that are happening with North and South Korea. There's stuff with the United States. So there's a lot of politics, and students are, involved or interested around the world. And so they can use something like wittycomics.com to illustrate what's going on. They can choose different backgrounds. It's pretty easy and simple. They don't have to register. So that's another good thing, just like Makebelieve Comic, where you don't have to get your students to sign up or put their name or register. they can just create the comic and then they save it as a JPEG or a PNG. So um, there's where your students can put a different ending or point of view. Now this was actually made with Criaza, but I took it off because Criaza doesn't really, I don't believe it's free anymore. So it might still exist, but I don't believe it's free. So that's why I didn't put that there to list it. But a lot of comic strips do have different, I think Picston, things like that, have characters from the past. You'll find things like Greek characters, or like here, Little Red Riding Hood. And these characters means that you can take stories, fairy tales, you might find Three Pigs, things like that, and your students can know that popular fairy tale and then write it from a different point of view, like from the wolf's point of view, or they could write a different ending as well. You can explore societal issues. Stripgenerator.com is another comic strip creator. This one isn't a good one to actually explore with young students because they don't filter what happens. So you might get questionable content on there, but it is a good comic creator. Another one is where students can read something from history and can visualize that history taking place. So here, and this one, with this particular one on Phrase It, it's because they have that old time character feel and stuff like that. You can visualize a song. So Narrowland.com shows a famous Beatles song, Imagine. And if you look it up, you can find a lot of different songs that are out there that are visualized as a comic. So a lot of times lyrics can be difficult to understand, but a comic can really bring that to life. You can explore your students can explore the definitions of a word by creating a comic of that word. They can show the difference between one form of that. A lot of different words have several definitions. They can have up to 11 different ones to explain. So for example, the word tag can be like tag you're it. Now you can tag someone on social media, and where you can tag them in a picture, things like that. Or there can be a tag that you put that kind of categorizes what your picture is about, sort of like a keyword or phrase. So they could always express that in a comic form, like the different ways. You can also have your students visualize research, so they can actually write long pieces of paper. They can do something very, very serious, which is illustrated here from someone that I've met in the past who's Skyped and worked a lot, has introduced himself to my students, and we've interviewed, and also the different teachers that I've trained with, which is Nick Sasanis, and he has lots of examples of his dissertation and stuff, which is now published. It's a book published, I believe, by Harvard University Press or something. And he also talks in his blog about how he was able to create this dissertation that has a lot of research in it. You can also use comics as a reflection. Now, this idea was taken from Makebelieve Comics. It actually has a lesson plan about that. Like at the end of the day, students just write in 10, 15 minutes, or even 5 minutes at the end of the day before they leave you, like an exit ticket or something. They just write. In comic form, they create a comic that says what they learned within that lesson, with that particular lesson. And so that it can be a reflection piece as well, the comics. Read, Write, Think, it also has a comic creator, a comic generator. So students just click and then they create the comic from there. They don't have to sign up or register, so that's really great as well. There is a rubric that you can use that I've used with my students. Here it's a Create a Comic to Support Literacy rubric, and you can find that in my book, gum.co/learn-to-go. And that's it. I mean, there's tons and tons that you can go and learn so much more. So you can do that from my Poultries, which has so many bookmarks. And actually, I'm always sharing ones as well. And even today, I learned about a new comic creator. So that'll be added to the list. So that's always a great way, is just to go through the bookmarks. And the one that I learned about just a while ago was Deco Comics. So I'll go ahead and I'll add Deco Comics to the chat box. And I discovered that one just a minute ago while I was on Twitter. So there's always different things that I'm finding, especially when it comes to comics, and I bookmark here. In Symbaloo, I have a bunch of comic creators listed as well. So thank you for coming today. You can find the slides and also a lot of the bookmarks and everything at shelleyterrell.com/comics. And we will see you next week when we talk about different gifts that you can create for Father's Day, Grandparents' Day, and Mother's Day, which are all coming up soon. So thank you and have a great